Hey everybody, this is Patrick from LSAT Lab. Let's work through Test 65, Passage 4. Anytime we work on reading comp, there's 3 different skill sets we're trying to build. We want to get better at how we read the passage. We want to get better at what we do after we've read a question stem, but before we dive into the answers. And then we want to get better at analyzing these answers. Let's remind ourselves of some of the goals of big picture reading. At the end of the first paragraph, we want to hopefully settle on the central topic, a framework that we can use to organize the 2 or 3 biggest ideas, and then take note of whether or not we've heard the author. As we read each paragraph, we try to build a passage map. We try to think about what function is this paragraph playing. We modulate our reading speed based on whether we're looking at a big idea or supporting details. If it's a big idea, we slow down and lovably comprehend. If it's supporting details, we hope to get it, but we're not going to slow down and try to reread it because we don't need that on a first pass. And lastly, we're hoping to actually identify 1, 2, or maybe 3 sentences that are like the most valuable sentence, the thing that resembles a thesis. We might have to put 2 or 3 sentences together to really capture the author's big points. So let's read the passage. Go ahead and pause the recording. Give this a read. We'd usually try to get it done in about 3 minutes, but you can take longer if you want to, and then unpause when you're done. Okay, welcome back. The first paragraph goals. What is the central topic? It's actually usually just in the first sentence. If the first sentence doesn't make it clear, look for what is sort of the common denominator between the first and the second sentence. Whatever we're still talking about is usually the central topic. What framework can we use to organize the big picture? We have these 7 sort of like genres of passages that we use, and more than one of them can apply to a given passage. And they spell out a stupid acronym named CHOP-PAT. And then lastly, do I see one of those amazing sentences with like the pivot words, the but, however, yet, recently, or just in general, did I hear the author's voice yet? So as we read this first sentence, what's my central topic? This one was pretty dense to me, so I would actually scale it back and think, let me start from a noun. Agricultural overproduction means you're farming too much, and there's environmental problems from farming too much. And lots of countries are trying to figure out how to deal with the problems from farming too much. And what they're doing is taking farmland and just taking it out of production. Okay, countries in Europe are letting some farmland chill because it's been overfarmed. Now I want to figure out what framework could I use, and am I going to see one of those spicy sentences that really focuses us on the author's agenda? Well, wait no longer, friends, because the next sentence has an amazingly delicious however. This tells me to slow down and zoom in. What's going on in this sentence? Restoring a balance to this land will be difficult. Well, I'm searching for a framework, so the word difficult is a clue. We previously said environmental problem, so I'm kind of thinking that maybe I should organize this in my head as problem and solution. So I try to really create some space in my head. The problem is that we want to restore this overly farmed land back to a natural balance of flora. And why is that a problem? Well, the nutrients have been depleted, and obviously plants need nutrients. And it's been heavily fertilized, so some annoying plants like thistles are going nuts. Once I have a decent sense of the problem, I'm going to be reading for solutions. And the next sentence actually is a potential solution. They're saying the quickest way to restore the natural balance would just be replace the topsoil with soil that's already in balance. However, we're not going to be able to do that across the entire European continent. Over time, the ecosystem will just fix itself. But the author is seemingly suggesting that it would take a long time. And so we have a study underway that's trying to accelerate that process. As we start each new paragraph, we want to slam on the brakes after that first sentence and ask ourselves, what is this doing for the big picture? And we use language from our framework to sort of describe it. We could describe that first paragraph by saying it introduced us to the problem, It rejected a couple solutions. We're not going to replace the soil. We're not going to just let it fix itself over time. And then it kind of teased the idea that this passage was going to be looking at a study that's trying to solve the problem. So now when I look at paragraph 2 and it starts in the study, just seems like this paragraph will talk about the study. I don't know if I'll get a solution in this paragraph, but that's all I'm listening for. This paragraph gets into the nitty-gritty of how they designed an experiment. So I know that we have some plots where we didn't put in anything, some where we put in corn. Those are the control plots. And then I know that in one of them they put in some native grasses and herbs, and in another one, in addition to that, they added some clover and delicious toad flax. And what we're getting in the last sentence is that thistles are being really forced out in the experimental plots. So when we added native grass and herbs, kind of forced out the thistles. That sounds like a potential solution. So I'm ready to add that idea to my mental box for solution. We're trying to restore European farmland, and it looks like planting a broad variety of species will help to chase those thistles away. Third paragraph, I'm reading the first sentence, slamming on the brakes, and then trying to figure out how do I categorize this in terms of my passage map. It looks like this is still describing the study. Now we're comparing the success we had from paragraph 2 to a different idea. What if in addition to that, we also add some microorganisms that you would usually find in restored natural soil? Well, it turns out this also seems to work. The seeds on these plots with the microorganisms are doing even better. Our last two sentences are where we're really returning to the big picture. This is the end of the passage, and they're sort of announcing the takeaways from this study. So here's the plan. We have a wide variety of native plant seeds, and then we add a scoop of beneficial microorganisms. So for our passage map, if I'm differentiating 2 from 3, I'm going to say that paragraph 2 told me to plant a wide variety of seeds, and paragraph 3 told me to put in a scoop of microorganisms. What would our most valuable sentences be? Well, paragraph 2 and 3 are all about the study, so I would take that first framing idea at the end of the first paragraph and say that all of paragraph 2 and 3 are underneath that umbrella. So I definitely want that as one of my big ideas. And I just want to make sure I have a sentence that represents the problem and the solution. The most important is the solution. So I definitely want that very last sentence where we sort of explicitly say, this is it, our solution. If I was looking for a sentence describing the problem, I would probably pick that second sentence. First question in this set, like most reading comp sets, is a main point. Here they're asking for the central idea. So central idea, main point. What do I know about that question type? When I'm trying to anticipate an answer, I try to build a sentence where the subject noun of the sentence is the central topic. What do I want the rest of the sentence to say about that noun? In this case, because it's problem solution, I need that main clause to sound like the solution. The correct answer is going to give you the main takeaway of the framework. So in a problem solution, the thing the author's got to give you is the solution. I also know that the correct answer is usually going to sound a lot like wording from my most valuable sentences. That's why they're so valuable to find. When it comes to trap answers, the biggest category is just the wrong emphasis. It doesn't focus on the right central topic, or if it does, it doesn't give you the main thing we need to know about it, which in this case would be the solution. Some answers will be wrong because a word is too strong. Some of them will actually contain a word or a modifier that goes against what was said in the passage. Some of them will make unsupported comparisons or unsupported causal claims. And some of them will just bring in stuff that we never talked about. Go ahead and pause the recording and try this main idea question on your own. We're putting on screen those 3 most valuable sentences that we picked. Hopefully that's enough to get an answer you feel good about. Unpause when you're done. Welcome back. You're trying to look for the subject and verb. So this is saying the rehabilitation of land can be accelerated by a 2-pronged strategy. That seems pretty good. I mean, we are trying to rehab land. That's the central topic, is trying to restore a natural balance. The Netherlands study did mention accelerating the process. And the solution in that final sentence is a two-pronged strategy. You do a wide variety of seeds and you add in some microorganisms. A feels like it's a contender. Let's check out B. B does seem to start dealing with the right central topic, restoring plant diversity to overused farmland. All right, so what's the solution? Well, it just says it requires many years and considerable effort. Okay, that's a little too generic. First of all, it kind of just sounds like a description of the problem. Restoring will be difficult. It's going to take a lot of effort. But, the payoff here is specifically what effort. We need to hear wide variety of seeds, sow in microorganisms. So this answer isn't mentioning the solution, which is the main deliverable, the main takeaway. C is saying that the problems we're facing from overusing farmland are so significant that we need to modify farming. And that's not quite right. We are just trying to figure out what's the best way to fix these thousands of acres that we've taken out of production. So modifying current agricultural practices is out of scope. We never talked about changing how we farm. We're just talking about how do we bring this dead land back to life. D is talking about the option where you just let the soil hang out on its own. You do no intervention and it'll just restore itself very gradually over time. Well, that was not the solution. The author wasn't happy with that timeline. She was like, let's look at this Netherlands study that's accelerating the process. So this is giving us the wrong solution. E is telling us that when you overuse farmland, you get stuff like diseases and weeds and thistles. Well, that would just be a description of the problem, doesn't mention the solution at all. It's also not the case that our main problem was the disease organisms. Our main problem was the thistles and the weeds. So even the emphasis here on the disease organisms is not even getting the problem right. All right, well, since the other four didn't really have much temptation for them, we can lock it in as A being our correct answer. We love that it is really capturing the whole framework. It's describing the problem. We need to rehab land that was damaged. And it's acknowledging that there was a solution, a two-pronged strategy. Okay, let's move on and try the next question. We're going to put all three paragraphs, the first sentence and the last sentence of all three paragraphs, to kind of remind you of the overall structure. Give it a try. All right, welcome back. This question's called organization. It's not a super common question. These answer choices essentially lay out the big functional ingredients of the passage. That's sort of what our passage map does. You want to think a lot about the last ingredient. That's typically the quickest way to get rid of some answers and find the contenders. The correct answer is going to lay out a list of abstract ingredients, and each one we could match up. In many cases, each ingredient represents one paragraph, but not always. When it comes to trap answers, it really just comes down to matching up abstract vocabulary. Every wrong answer is wrong because one of the ingredients or more just can't be matched up. So we'll think about our passage map. The first paragraph sort of gave us the problem, rejected a couple solutions, and then teased the idea that, there's a study trying to figure out a new solution. And then the other two paragraphs were just, the first part of the study, the first takeaway, the second part of the study, the second takeaway. Now let's ask ourselves the shortcut question. What would we say is the final ingredient of the passage? The last couple sentences are giving us the takeaways, the implications. Here's what this study means. So as we're analyzing these answers, the last ingredient should sound something like the takeaways from the study. I'm going straight to the final ingredient of each answer choice to see if I think it's worth reading. The results are inconclusive but promising. Well, I kind of like that. We are judging the results. We're talking about the results. Inconclusive sounds a little more negative than I'm expecting. I don't really see anything in those last two sentences that sounds like the author's being cautious or hesitant. All science is somewhat cautious and hesitant, but there's nothing in the text that suggests, let's slow our roll, So maybe, I don't want to get rid of it based on that, but I don't get a great feeling from inconclusive. The last ingredient of B is saying that the passage ends by modifying the hypothesis. I can't get behind that at all. I don't know what hypothesis we're talking about, and we're not modifying anything at the end. We're just announcing the takeaways from the study. Get out of here, B. Last ingredient of C is that we're drawing conclusions about how effective this plan is likely to be. Are we? I mean, I think we're just saying what the plan is. I don't see anything in those sentences where the author editorializes like, I give this a 30% chance of working. So the likely effectiveness, again, I don't love getting rid of it, but I definitely don't love it. D says that we end with a methodology to achieve this revised goal. Revised goal? The goal has stayed the same. We're trying to restore natural plant diversity to overfarmed land. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think we have any revised goal. And then the ending of E is a course of action based on the study's findings. Well, I definitely love that, because the last sentence is saying, well, based on what we've found, here's what we should do. We should plant a wide variety of seeds and add in some microorganisms. So from all the final ingredients, I like E the most. Now I would kind of zoom in on E and see if I can confirm the rest of it. The first ingredient says that we start the passage by presenting a problem. I am definitely on board with that. That's how we described this in our passage map. They literally mention problem, it'll be difficult, there are problem weeds like thistles. We got it. Just out of curiosity, how would the first ingredients of these other answers have fared? Was a goal stated? Sure, I mean the goal is to restore a natural balance of flora to the land. I could live with that. Is a study evaluated? No. A study starts happening in the second and third paragraphs, and the author doesn't really evaluate it. I mean, the final couple sentences are takeaways, but the passage does not begin by evaluating a study. So C is definitely dead. Does the passage begin by presenting a hypothesis? No. I mean, a hypothesis is either a guess, like, what do you think we're having for dinner tonight? My hypothesis is tacos. That's very uncommon usage on LSAT. Normally, they would say, why is Jermaine crying? And the hypothesis would be the explanatory claim. My hypothesis is he's crying because no one saved him a mole taco. So there's no hypothesis, get out of here. B, A says that a study is described. Yet again, it does not start with a study. The first ingredient of these answers really should match up with how the passage began, not something that starts in the second paragraph. Back to E, how is our second ingredient looking? Do we go on after discussing the problem to talk about a study addressing the problem? Well, sure, that's everything from the last sentence in the first paragraph all the way through the third paragraph, other than those last couple sentences where we announce the takeaways of the study. All right, so E is our correct answer. Notice that it has 3 ingredients. The passage did have 3 paragraphs, but this answer is not structured as 1 ingredient per paragraph. That middle ingredient in E is like 70% of the passage. All right, we're looking at our third question. This one deals exclusively with the third paragraph, so we'll just put the third paragraph on screen. Go ahead and pause the recording and give this one a try. Welcome back. So what kind of question type is this? This one is asking for an actual fact. Which of these was offered in the passage as an explanation? The other must be true wordings are things like, according to the passage, what did the author mention, state, or say? What did the passage indicate? All of these phrases should make you think, hey, not too bad. They're just literally saying, go find me this detail. In order to anticipate a correct answer, we start by just reacquainting ourselves with the available text. So you use the clue words in the question stem to figure out which sentence or sentences are being tested, kind of lock in on that support window. How are they going to make the correct answer hard? They're going to say it back to us in a weird way. I like to think of them processing it through some sausage grinder called the complicator, where it converts things with different synonyms or different syntax so that you get the same meaning, basically, but it's presented in a weird way you don't recognize. When it comes to wrong answers, as always, we're on the lookout for stuff that sounds too strong. We're going to steer clear of anything that brings up something unmentioned or something that's mentioned elsewhere in the passage, not within the support window. We want to be careful of them turning an absolute word like tall into a comparison, like taller. And some answers will just go against what we read. All right, so what did they offer as an explanation? The clue words here are the plants grew better when they were sown on this land that had been out of production for 20 years. We can see right at the beginning of this third paragraph, we're talking about planting seeds in land that was taken out of production 20 years ago. But it's the second sentence where you start seeing they fared better, they grew better when sown on this land. And the next sentence is saying, well, this is why. So I know this sentence is my answer. This is the because. So what is the explanation? We're comparing the soil that we had been doing from paragraph 2 with the native seed blend to soil from nearby land that hasn't been farmed in 20 years. And what they're saying is the farmed land has a lot of disease organisms, but it doesn't have these beneficial fungi that would fight the disease organisms. Meanwhile, this land that's been chilling for 20 years, it doesn't really specify whether there's disease organisms in there, but we know that that land has this like good beneficial fungi that would protect against the diseases. They're asking, why did the plants grow better on this out of production land? And we would say, well, they grew better on that land because that land has this beneficial fungi that protects the plant from diseases. When we look at these 5 answers, they actually start 2 different ways. They either use the overused farmland as the subject, as A, B, and C do, or they use the out of production soil as the subject. That's what D and E are doing. So A, B, and C is referring to the overused farmland. So A is saying they lack key nutrients. It's not a nutrient. They lack an organism, like fungi, that would fight off diseases. Get out of here, A. B is saying they're struggling because they're overrun with harmful and aggressive organisms. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the other part of that is that they are missing the symbiotic fungi that would fight those organisms, but that's kind of 2 different ways of saying the same thing. Because they don't have the protective fungi, they are overrun with diseases. Let's keep that. C is saying the farmed land is struggling because it's been over-fertilized. That is outside the support window. It has nothing to do with what we're looking at here. When I switch to D and E, the subject noun has changed. Now we're viewing the comparison from the perspective of the land that's been out of production for 20 years. The seeds are doing better on this land that's been out of production because that land has a lot of the beneficial fungi. D is saying that this soil is lacking in that beneficial fungi, so that cannot be correct. That's the opposite of what we wanted. The land that's been farmed for many years has been lacking in fungi. If you took the second half of D and paired it up with A, B, or C, it would be correct. They're just kind of messing with our brain by switching the subject noun. And then E is saying the land that's been out of production has a lot of harmful organisms. That's also the opposite. That's what's true of the land that has been farmed. So it looks like B is our correct answer. On to our third question. Go ahead and pause the recording and give this one a try. Welcome back. This question stem is saying which of the following is most likely to be true. So we're still doing inference, but now we're in the squishy territory of most supported. If there are clue words, we will sort of reacquaint ourselves with what was said about those words, what was said in that sentence. We expect the correct answer to be a little bit more challenging here. It can come in different forms. Sometimes it's very derivable from one claim. It's just a very awkward rephrasing. Other times it was nothing that was ever said, but it's clearly conveyed if you read between the lines. But sometimes the correct answer is pretty loose. It'll just be sort of a reasonable speculation. It's not actually said in the passage. It's not directly implied, but it seems, that the author would be more likely to agree with that than any of the other answers. The more provable it is, the better. But we need to remind ourselves that sometimes the correct answer really isn't that provable. It's just better than all the alternatives. A lot of what we use to help ourselves here are getting rid of answers or distancing ourselves from answers that say something too strong, bring up something we don't think was ever mentioned, make an unknown comparison, or go against what we read. So the clue words we've got here are soil that's used to replace topsoil in the process that's mentioned. In the middle of the first paragraph, we talk about replacing topsoil. We know that it's the quickest way to restore heavily fertilized land, but we also know it's impractical on a large scale, such as what we're doing in this passage. But they're asking us, what do we know about the soil you would replace it with? So the whole idea of replacing the soil would be to remove one of the problems that the current soil has. What are the problems that the current soil has? We know one problem is it's heavily fertilized, so it wouldn't be heavily fertilized. We know that the nutrients have been depleted, so presumably if you give new soil, you would want it to have plenty of nutrients, or at least not depleted. And we know that problem weeds like thistles are proliferating. So if we were going to replace the topsoil, we would want to do it with soil in which there are not weeds like thistles proliferating. So we have several options, but we basically need an answer that takes one of the problems the current soil has and just flips it. Thistles cannot grow in it. Well, that kind of seems like it's flipping the third one. It's a little harsh though. Cannot grow in it? I mean, a thistle still probably could grow in any soil. It's more about, are they currently growing? Like, have they proliferated to where they're crowding out the native plants? So maybe hang on to it, but that seems pretty harsh. B is saying it doesn't have a lot of fungi. Well, that's nowhere near this support window. That's not any of our three details. And fungi in the third paragraph is presented as a good thing, so that it even feels a little bit opposite. We would presumably like it to have that beneficial fungi. It has very few seeds of native grasses and herbs. That doesn't match any of our three things. That's not talking about fertilization, nutrients, or thistles. It also has strong language, so there's a couple things unappealing there. I don't know if I'd feel totally confident it's wrong, but I certainly wouldn't be attracted to it at all. D is saying this new soil would not contain a ton of fertilizer. Okay, that looks like we're flipping the first thing, right? We're trying to restore this heavily fertilized land. If we replaced it with heavily fertilized soil, that would be kind of dumb, wouldn't it? We wouldn't have changed anything. So that seems pretty good. And then E is saying that this new soil was never used to grow corn. That seems out of nowhere. It's very strong. It's outside the support window. I am not attracted to it. So it looks like D is the winner. I don't feel the need to go to battle for A or C when I definitely like D. All right, on to the next question. This paragraph should be all you need to consult to answer it, so pause the recording and give it a try. Welcome back. This sort of question type primarily serves to, we call local purpose. In order to, serves to, primarily to. They all end in infinitives, and infinitives convey purpose. Why did you do that? I did that to warn you. I did that to show you I care. Local purpose questions have a pretty fun formula. They're going to ask us about the purpose of a certain detail. But the purpose isn't in that sentence where the detail is. It's almost always in the claims right before the detail. Sometimes it's going to be right after. But essentially, this is testing the bookend ideas. If this were an Oreo and the detail were the cream, this is testing the cookies. So the correct answer should usually sound like it's reinforcing language that comes from sort of a broader framing idea that leads into the detail, or a broader takeaway that follows the detail. Incorrect answers will often be too strong, go against what the author was doing. Sometimes they'll just make up a purpose, a role that doesn't reflect anything the author was ever trying to do. And a lot of incorrect answers try to pull wording from the detail sentence itself in case students got lost in the cream and forgot to check on those cookies. So they give us a line reference. We know where to look to find the actual detail. But we want to see the lead-up ideas. We want to remind ourselves, what was the author doing in this vicinity in a broad sense? Well, she was listing out problems with soil before that. She was saying, it's got no nutrients, it's heavily fertilized. And then we got solution number one. The quickest thing would be just replace the topsoil, but we can't do that to Europe. It's a little too much topsoil. So the context right before this detail was talking about one potential solution that isn't viable. And the idea of letting an ecosystem gradually fix itself over time was another solution that the author didn't think was viable. And then the following sentence is saying, but the Dutch are trying to speed this up. They're hoping they can accelerate. So when we look at the before and after claims, they're all dealing with time periods. We're trying to accelerate it. We know we won't get the fastest, but can we do better than the slowest? So I would probably predict an answer that sounds something like, we're mentioning that it could restore itself very gradually over time to sort of suggest there is a way to deal with this problem, but we don't love it. It's not as desirable as speeding it up a little. A is saying that the Netherlands study is trying to discredit the idea that an ecosystem will fix itself over time. That's not true at all. The study is trying to figure out how to speed it up. So it totally agrees with the long-held belief. It's thinking, is there any intervention we humans can do to speed up what we know nature will do on its own? B says that people who think that aggressive, intense farming is good will usually justify that by saying, come on, man, ecosystems will fix themselves over time. That's just the wrong role. We were never doing that. There were never any people in the first paragraph who favor intense agricultural production. So we're not trying to cite the way they justify their beliefs. The word generally is trying to play off the, and while it is generally believed, that kind of leads into our detail. So they're using a little bit of word bait to try to get us to like B. C says that at this point in the passage, the author's trying to say, guys, over-farming isn't as dire as you believe. The ecosystem's gonna fix itself over time. But there's nothing in here that is suggesting, relax, guys, it's not as dire as you believe. And once again, they're trying to fish us in with word bait. And while it is generally believed, comes right before the detail that's being asked about. So they are trying to make us like it just because we see similar words. D has some loaded language, the most common perception. It's also not in any way a reason why overproduction is problematic. If anything, the fact that ecosystems can fix themselves over time makes it seem like it's not a problem to overproduce. So this answer is both too strong and also reflects an idea that the author's never trying to convey. E is saying that this belief helps to describe the circumstances that surround and motivate the Netherlands study. We could probably make that work. I mean, we had just gotten done saying that the quickest way to fix this problem is impractical. The problem would fix itself, but very gradually over time. So let's investigate the possibility of accelerating a little bit. Let's see if we can speed that up. That's what's motivating us to do this research. Okay, we can make it work. Notice again, on local purpose, the correct answer usually reinforces language right before or right after the detail. In this case, we can see the correct answer is really reinforcing language that comes after the claim. And one of the clues that we might have seen that would have made us think, hey, this is really pointing to the idea that follows, is the rhetorical marker while. We're saying, while damaged ecosystems will restore themselves over time, a study in the Netherlands is hoping we could speed it up. On to the next question. This should be all the text you need to answer this one, so pause the recording and give it a try. Welcome back. They're asking us when it would be least useful to use these methods the Netherlands study is developing. And so what we need to hear when we read that question stem is that they're testing us on well, what is useful? Like, let's figure out when the methods of the Netherlands study are advantageous, and then if we just flip that, we have an answer for when it would be not advantageous. So what are the considerations that motivated this Netherlands study? How was it designed to help us? Well, we knew that nutrients were depleted from this soil. We knew that it was heavily fertilized, and so thistles were potentially going to dominate. We knew that it was impractical to replace the topsoil, and that we didn't want to wait however long it would take for nature to fix itself. So a correct answer could just flip any of those details. It wouldn't be as advantageous to do what the Netherlands study is telling us if the nutrients aren't depleted, if it's not heavily fertilized and there isn't a risk of thistles dominating, if you can just remove and replace the topsoil, or if you're fine with waiting a long time for nature to fix itself. A is saying the nutrients have been depleted. That's the opposite of what we wanted. We were looking for an answer that said, well, if the nutrients aren't depleted, then maybe you don't need this Netherlands technique. B is saying the topsoil can be easily removed and replaced. Great, that was one of the 4 things we were considering. We were told that the quickest way to solve your soil problem is just to replace the topsoil. So you don't need the Netherlands study and its takeaways if you have the option of just doing the quickest way. C is saying that this field has been heavily fertilized for decades. That would match what was happening with Europe. We were looking for not heavily fertilized, so that's another opposite. D is saying, well, this field has the potential to make rye. Well, cool, D. That has nothing to do with any of the details that motivated the Netherlands study. Similarly, with E, it's saying the Netherlands study won't be useful if the field you're working on is adjacent to where corn is growing. That doesn't have anything to do with any of our 4 details. So we had a nice blend there of a couple things that actively go against the details we're looking for, and a couple answers where they just brought in brand new stuff that didn't match any of the available traits, adjectives, or relationships. All right, couple questions left. Pause the recording and try this one. All right, welcome back. Again, we're getting an inference question, and again, it's of the most supported, most likely sort of strength. They're asking what would happen if disease organisms were eliminated from a plot of land. All right, well, let me figure out what disease organisms do when they're present, and then I'll just flip that, and that'll be my answer for what happens if you eliminate them. So disease organisms are mentioned in the middle of the 3rd paragraph. When you plant seeds in heavily farmed land, which has a lot of aggressive disease organisms in it, the seeds don't fare as well as they do if you plant them in land that doesn't have all these diseases in them. So if we flip that, we're thinking if you were to remove the disease organisms, seeds should do better. They should fare better than before. A is saying that by removing the disease organisms, you would get rid of the symbiotic mycorrhiza. But that doesn't make any sense. We were told that in constantly used agricultural land, in heavily used farmland, the mycorrhiza is lacking. So it's not even there in the first place. B is saying that if you get rid of the disease organisms, thistles are unable to survive. That sounds pretty strong. I mean, I know they're less likely to dominate and crowd out, but just unable to survive? That's way too strong. C is saying if we get rid of the disease organisms, then the native plants would have a better chance of survival. I guess that's what we were saying, right? If we get rid of the disease organisms, the seeds would do better. When we talk about seeds, are we talking about beneficial native plants? Yeah. I mean, the native plant species are the idea of restoring the natural balance. So let's keep it around. I think that's kind of like what we want. D is saying that if you get rid of the disease organisms, then all beneficial microorganisms will increase in the long term. It's just too strong. There's no way I can support the idea that 100% of them will increase. And the last one is saying if you get rid of these disease organisms, then other disease organisms will fill in the gaps proportionately. Well, there's two problems. We never talked about other types of disease organisms. That's out of scope. And then increasing proportionally is a very extreme idea. It means that like if there's half as many of those, there's 2 times as many of these. Proportionality is too exact, so it's almost always too strong. Looks like C is our best answer. We refer to that sometimes as flipping the causal difference maker. We know that these organisms are making a difference. They're making it so that the seeds don't grow as well. LSAT loves to test the idea of if you removed that cause, you would remove that effect. Last question, and she's a doozy. Go ahead and pause the recording and give this a try. Welcome back. This is one of those dreaded analogy problems, and I say dreaded because, generally speaking, these are harder and take longer for us to do than other question types. We know we're going to be getting new ideas in the answers, but we have to go to the passage and figure out what are the like adjectives or traits or relationships that I can think of in a general way and apply it to some new situation. The correct answer will reinforce some sort of adjective, trait, or relationship that we can name or reference from the passage. The wrong answers will just have something that doesn't match. We're being asked about the process by which the spread of thistles can be curtailed. That's kind of confusing because they say that this is described in the last paragraph, but thistles do not appear at all in the last paragraph. So what is that code for? The end of the second paragraph suggests that curtailing the spread of thistles is sort of the same as getting the native plants to grow. Because it said at the end of paragraph 2, after 3 years, thistles have been forced out where the native plants were successfully growing back. So we can interpret this question as, what's the process by which we get the native plants to grow back as robustly as possible? The more of them that are growing, the more we're curtailing the spread of thistles. All right, paragraph 3. How do we get these native plants to grow back? We know the last few sentences are where they described the process we're going to use going forward. The last sentence itself is probably the most specific. We should sow in beneficial microorganisms along with planting this wide variety of native plant seeds. All right, so the process is systematically sowing beneficial microorganisms along with a wide variety of seeds. But we need to make this abstract. This is an analogy question. So let's think to ourselves more about the relationships. Like, why are we adding microorganisms with a wide variety? We were told that these microorganisms will help the plants grow by sort of protecting them against disease organisms. So I would think to myself, it's thistles versus the native plants. So I'm trying to stop thistles from dominating by adding as many competitors, as many of the native plant seeds as I can, but I'm also giving them sort of a secret weapon that helps protect them. These microorganisms give them an extra shield or an extra strength factor. When we look at these answer choices, all 5 of them start off the same way. They're all beginning with this idea of we're trying to prevent A from winning a majority. So it looks like we're trying to stop thistles from being the dominant force, the majority in this plot. Party A equals thistles. We're going to try to prevent thistles from winning a majority. A is saying that we're going to prevent thistles from dominating by publishing editorials. I guess that would be by adding microorganisms, which will encourage the thistles supporters to stop supporting thistles and start supporting our native seeds. Okay, did that make any sense? Thistles supporters switching allegiance? I don't really know how we would match that up. There was nothing in the passage other than fertilizer that we could say was, encouraging thistles. But the thing in the third paragraph had nothing to do with fertilizer. So I can't really find a match for thistles supporters. B says that we're going to publish an editorial that defends the native seeds against attacks by broadcast journalists. Oh my. Well, we might be able to make this work because we could say the editorials are the microorganisms that we're adding. They're supposed to protect against the disease organisms. So we could call the journalists disease organisms, the enemy of the people, and the rival party would be the native plants. This seems crazy, but I guess we could make that work. We're trying to prevent thistles from winning a majority by helping out these candidates from a rival party, helping out the native seeds by protecting them from an attack. The attack is coming from disease organisms like journalists, and the defense mechanism is the editorial, the microorganisms. It's got a lot of layers, but we can kind of make that work. C says that we're publishing editorials that are trying to discourage thistle supporters from showing up, from turning out. So again, the editorials would be that we're adding these microorganisms in order to help out our native seeds. But discouraging supporters is the same problem we had with A. The only thing supporting thistle is fertilizer. And adding microorganisms has nothing to do with fertilizer. D says that we are adding these microorganisms that attack the things that support thistles. Once again, there's nothing in this passage that supports thistles other than fertilizer. And then finally, E is saying that we're going to add these microorganisms to create antagonism between factions within the thistle party. It's gotten so contentious. Thistles, can you just not have some civility? So here the problem would be, what do we mean by like factions within the thistle party? There weren't like two different types of thistles fighting against each other. So it looks like B is our best chance at matching. All of these answers involve publishing editorials, which is supposed to be adding beneficial microorganisms to the soil. And the point of adding the beneficial microorganisms is to protect our boys, our native seeds, from being attacked by a disease. B is the only one that says these editorials will protect our candidate against attacks. All right, that is a tough passage with several tough questions. As you're going through reading comp on your own, make sure that when you're reviewing your work, you're thinking about it through these three different lenses. Could I have improved the way I read the passage? Could I have improved my understanding of what this question stem was asking me? Could I have improved where I look in the passage for the answer? Was I able to find quick, clear reasons to get rid of some answers? Was I disciplined enough to let an answer still be active if I didn't really understand whether it was right or wrong? All right, that'll do it. Thanks for watching. Check out our other videos on YouTube and come visit us at lsatlab.com, create a free account. See you guys later.